Hello, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Very packed room. We're going to kind of transition now from a little bit about what we've been talking about in terms of what's been done and what we've learned from disaster response situations, and think a little bit more about then what do we learn and what are we going to do going forward. And as Kylo mentioned, the topic for today is this idea of what's next. I'm Corina Gardner, and I head up a team that looks at all of the research and intelligence across all of the different sectors that we work in Mobile for Development. And with that in mind, what we try and look at are, instead of looking at things from a more siloed perspective of agriculture, health, or disaster response, we really try and learn from the technology, which knows no borders in terms of national borders or specific sectors. And we try and understand how do we leverage that technology and where there are both common opportunities and common problems that can be addressed across different countries, across different sectors, and across different types of companies and organizations. And that's one of the things that we have here today in our panel is a good representation of the very different types of groups and organizations that are brought together to come up with common solutions. So starting out to introduce our panel today, we have Jack Beach to my left, who is representing Living Waters Rwanda, and everybody will tell a little bit more about what they do today. And we have Venura Mendis, who's here with Dialog Sri Lanka from Sri Lanka. We have Elaine Weidman, who is the VP for Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility with Ericsson. And we have, of course, Jacob Korenblum, who is the CEO and founder of Souktel. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, and we are kind of starting a little bit later, so we're going to try and jump right through getting to know who our panel is, but then start talking about what we do see coming forward in the future. So let's start with an introduction from Jack, please.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Jack Beach. I work as the technical advisor for Living Water International in Rwanda. I've been in Rwanda for about 4 years now, working in various capacities across the WASH and ICT 4D sectors. We're a nonprofit organization aiming to deliver clean, potable drinking water through drilling boreholes and installing hand pumps, mostly in rural communities. Our first global operations began in Kenya in 1991, and the Rwanda program started in 2007, to which we've drilled about 350 boreholes, and we'll be adding 50 more this year. Billions of dollars are spent every year to increase the water access in developing nations. However, as many as 60% of the hand pumps that are installed break within six months to 2 years after installation. So this is a huge problem that we felt specifically in Rwanda, where we implemented a piloting and operations and maintenance program. Our current model is a circuit riding model where we have a vehicle equipped to conduct repairs that rides circuits around looking for broken hand pumps and repairs pumps when they find different pumps broken. As you can imagine, the costs with this type of system are relatively high. There's costs for tires, fuel, the wear and tear on the vehicles. And so it's a great challenge that we face, not only in Rwanda, where we have a functioning maintenance program, but also around the world in developing nations, especially for the nearly 1 billion people that do not have access to an improved water source. With that challenge, though, came an incredible opportunity. Portland State University's Sustainable Water Environmental Energy Technologies Laboratory, the SWEET Lab, approached Living Water International with an emerging technology. There was a remote monitoring sensor they wanted to install in hand pumps to monitor hand pump functionality. The sensor is equipped with a SIM card that sends information about the hand pump to the server over the data network. In 2013, Portland State University approached Living Water to enter into a formal partnership to apply for a seed grant through the GSMA Association. We won that grant, and by the end of this year, we'll have 200 of these remote monitoring sensors installed in hand pumps across the country. Just to talk a little bit more about the sensor itself, it's equipped with a pressure transducer and an accelerometer and a SIM card. And so the accelerometer tells if the handle is moving. The pressure transducer tells if there's water in the water tank, and it sends that information daily to the internet. So we're utilizing web services such as Clipfolio Dashboard, ArcGIS, and different types of services like this to see hand pump functionality, to see the uptime, the downtime. I'm running out of time, and different things like that. So I'll leave it at that, and we can get more into kind of the direction that it's going in just a little bit.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, good morning everybody. My name is Venura Mendis from Dialog Sri Lanka. I head Dialog's product innovation team. We essentially look at evaluating new concepts that come into the business across all the business verticals and look at productizing them. I also look after Dialog's developer community engagement program, IdeaMart. Okay, so mobile for development and Dialog. Digital inclusion and digital empowerment are very, very important to Dialog. And this really stems from the fact that in Sri Lanka, there are two very distinct segments. There's the top of the pyramid, a very highly affluent group of people that consume digital services, high ARPU, very similar to the West. And then there's the middle and the base of the pyramid, again, very different, both financially and socially. So really, our whole product strategy is around building services that genuinely uplift the quality of life of people in the bottom two segments and try to bridge the gap, essentially bring them up to the quality of life that the people at the top of the pyramid have. So just to give you a flavor of what I mean here, I'll very quickly talk about three of the services that try to do this. One is actually a service that we launched 5 years ago called TradeNet, but I have to mention it because of the impact it had and the things it starts to do. So TradeNet essentially is a means of information dissemination, and it starts to address the information asymmetry between the smallholder farmers and the markets. So Sri Lankan, in the agri sector, there's a very dispersed value chain with lots of players. So getting information flow right really helps to bridge the gaps between supply and demand, and uplift the quality of life and make sure the farmers get the best price for their produce. Another service, this is something we drew inspiration from the microfinance industry, is the 5-star program. And this is essentially an advocate for dialogue services at a grassroots level in villages. And essentially what we've done here is we've improved Dialog's own distribution channels and made the last mile a human mile. And I mentioned earlier, one of the difficulties we have with digital services is, for that part of the segment, is the relevancy and affinity, because people are very disconnected. So these 5-star merchants who are very familiar with these environments, village environments, can go explain to people how things work, make them familiar with it, actually do transactions for them, and in terms of m-commerce transactions, and then get them used to services. And finally, IdeaMart, the developer program that I referred to earlier. This is a recent engagement, and while this was really positioned as a means of boosting our VARs offerings in an open innovation model. So what we're trying to do here is, without launching the traditional 30 or 40 services we would launch, it's about launching thousands of services. And what we found is that it's almost had a very interesting result, because we expected all these APIs to be used in various smartphone applications, other applications, but what we found, a majority of these applications have become feature phone based, SMS, USSD based. And a lot of these, because of the high rev shares that we offer to CPs, have driven lots of new services, especially around information dissemination and supply optimization in the agro sector. So that's a quick intro from me.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Elaine Weidman from Ericsson. Is the mic on?
It'll come up as we speak.
Okay. I wanted to just start with a comment about the video. Well, we have been working for about 15 years now with disaster response in a program called Ericsson Response, and have long history being in 180 countries. We've supported disasters basically all over the world and have set up a quite robust system with different hubs in order to deploy equipment and training and so on. And but what we, and that will be discussed on the workshop on Wednesday, but what we were showing in the video is really showing the role that mobile communication can play in the NOCs, or the Network Operations Centers of the future, and really looking how, what will the future of public safety be like, how can it be like, and how can we even start to envision that today, given a lot of the obstacles and challenges that were mentioned. And the demo, there's a live demo that you can visit in the Ericsson Hall too. The videos show mostly about fire in Australia, but we also have the real demo showing lots around water in different areas. The other comment on humanitarian response I want to mention, because refugees came up earlier, and here, actually today, later today, we're announcing that we're we're working with a small organization called Refugees United, using mobile technology to help refugees search and find each other. And we have had that service running in Africa, in DRC, Somalia, Kenya, and Uganda for a couple of years now, but today we are launching that for Syrian refugees. So we're launching that in Jordan and also in Iraq, and upcoming in Turkey, so as a way to help Syrian refugees be able to search and find each other. So just a couple of humanitarian comments. When it comes to mobile for development, it's an area we have been working with for quite a long time as well. We just finished a study last year together with Columbia University, looking at just some practical issues around deployment of mobile in one area, which is education. And there we see, you know, the barriers are not necessarily the technology, the barriers are everything around it. It came up in the first session, electricity. I mean, how can we provide rural access to internet if we can't provide electricity? And then a lot around local capacity building and teacher training and the whole ecosystem around mobile for development. So I think that's a really important issue. When it comes to the future, I think that we just released a report, Ericsson Mobility Report, and we looked at Middle East and Africa, and we see 80% of the mobile subscriptions today are still 2G, but within 5 years, it'll be the reverse. 80% will be on 3G and 4G in Middle East and Africa. And that's pretty amazing opportunity to start to think about, in the terms of mobile for development, what will happen with cloud, what will happen with big data and analytics, what will happen with machine to machine, all the services, vast opportunities that can be enabled on smartphones and able to improve lives. So I think I'll leave it there, but I think the possibilities are amazing for the future.
Great.
Good morning, Jacob from Souktel. You've seen a little bit of our work on the video. We design and deliver custom mobile solutions and software platforms that support the work of development implementers, aid organizations, and then also mobile network operators. We run a range of services in a range of fields, focusing primarily on disaster response, as you've seen, employment generation, education, women and youth. We work in partnership with funders, we work in partnership with implementers, and with mobile networks quite directly, and a lot of our work actually relates to building those partnerships. So in addition to providing the software and the services, how do you bring diverse stakeholders together? An interesting example, I know the video focused very much on our work in Palestine. We're based in the Middle East, and that's where we have been located for the past 10 years. That's given us a very unique perspective on what it means to develop mobile services for development. We are, as you see, very active in places like Gaza, also Iraq, Somalia, areas that have a high propensity for conflict. And as a result, mobile technology really has the ability to make a key difference in these communities. And we've seen this in the Philippines as well, which is not a conflict zone, but an area that is prone to disaster. We have launched in the past couple of years a service in Rwanda, which utilizes the job matching technology that was referenced here. The interesting thing about that service is It's first of all done in partnership with GSMA and with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, along with other partners as well. But the interesting thing about that service is the way that it brings together implementers in the field, employers, mobile networks, two of which, Tigo and MTN, are partners on the service directly, and then learning partners like the MasterCard Foundation and others in the ecosystem. And so I think when we think about mobile for development, where that's going and creating what's next, which is, as you know, the theme of Congress in general, I think it's really going to focus on these multi-stakeholder partnerships. So, you know, we've got, and you saw it when we did the voting at the start, people in the room from a range of sectors, telcos, implementers, and so forth. Aside from events like this, I don't know that we have a lot of good opportunities to interact with each other. And when we come into the room, the interesting thing we found when GSMA convened a roundtable earlier this month in Rwanda, where we had Ministry of Youth from Rwanda, USAID, telecom providers, and implementers and private sector partners all sitting together, is we don't always speak the same language. And so I think, you know, in terms of creating what's next, the opportunity and the challenge is going to be how to bring together stakeholders from different backgrounds, get us all on the same track, let's say, or the same path going forward, so that we can create some of these great, meaningful services for users.
Great, thanks. And so, I mean, I think that's a perfect segue into exactly what we kind of want to think about and focus on. One of the things that's, you know, at least for me personally, and I think why a lot of people are excited to work in this space is, you know, what we see is almost, you know, what once was science fiction is almost becoming reality before our eyes. And as Tim mentioned when he opened with the statistics around, you know, less and less is that reality that seemed so futuristic only available to rich nations or to people who are born into privilege, but more and more these are realities that are extending into across all populations and across all geographies. And I think part of how that transition happens is actually by people just having big ideas, by actually being able to imagine and to dream of what's possible. And so much of the stuff that we do, that's what's going to move forward. And then I think absolutely understanding who needs to be a part of then taking the first steps towards driving towards those possibilities. So I think I just want to actually talk a little bit more about, you know, from your perspectives as, you know, groups who have all, you know, all pretty solid partners, both of GSMA, of our Mobile for Development team, and therefore people who've kind of been working in this space for a while. I want to think a little bit about what are some of the big ideas. What do you see coming down the pipeline as where we should be focusing on? What's the realm of possibility if we start pushing out our imagination to what kind of services this technology can provide? And so maybe, Jack, can I know you've had a lot of interesting conversations about this sensor and it does very specific things for living water, but what are some of the things that you maybe think about of how it could be applied in other places?
Sure. So there's a development organization existing in Rwanda called Dialog Health Programs. They're utilizing the sensor for things such as cook stoves to monitor CO2. They're using it for latrines in India to study latrine usage. They're using them for water quality incubators to verify the incubation time and temperature is consistent throughout the period for incubation. We're using them for hand pumps, obviously. So there's already an expanse of ways to apply this, different types of settings, but for me personally, in Rwanda, there's great interest amongst the government. When I walk into the Ministry of Natural Resources, their eyes light up when I put the sensor on the table in front of them. They say, "Oh, well, can we have this monitor water quantity at rivers, at streams? Can we do water quality with this? Is there a way we can have this go for hydropower?" And they want to monitor all these different types of applications. So I think that it can expand. Basically, the sensor itself doesn't change, but the measurement device changes. So it can be retrofitted to monitor turbidity at a hydropower site or RPMs for a turbine in that hydropower plant. Solar power, water quality is a huge one. I could touch on that a little bit. But these are just some ways that we see this type of technology expanding, just given the real-time advantage to be able to see the functionality of hand pumps on a Clipfolio dashboard from anywhere in the world where there's internet access. This week I'm following a network validation team, their process as they map out the network for this project in particular. I'm following that from my hotel room here in Barcelona with the use of electronic reporting software on iOS devices in the country. So it's really, we could talk all day, I think, about the different types of applications, but there's a few just to start.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things I find really interesting about beyond even the machines or the water quality or the things that you get information is this also provides you information about the users who are actually, who are going to the pumps, who are getting the water. It actually helps you understand a little bit about the behaviors of the people who are actually dependent on these services. And that, again, is, I think, user analytics is a big theme in what is underlying what's possible. And I know, actually, for instance, Venura, the examples that you were giving are all platforms that actually provide an opportunity for your entire community to actually interact with each other or with the company. And I think, that was one of the things that I found really interesting, is that I think this is a dawn of a new amount of local content that's either relevant to the users because it's locally created in a way that couldn't be if it's becoming developed in Silicon Valley, and yet at the same time it also helps you understand them a lot better. And I mean, is that sort of the foundation for what you guys see going forward, or are there other big ideas that you have and what you're focused on at Dialog?
No, I think that's certainly one of them. And I think for an operator, understanding our place in the value chain is critical. And what we need to start thinking of this space is as an ecosystem. I think you were describing it as so it's the same thing. I mean, for instance, in Sri Lanka, 47 acro zones with various localized weather patterns, soil, all of these things, fertilizer being delivered at various points. So this is not content that a single CP or for that matter even Dialog can even touch. So it has to come from the farmers from the region. So our platform has actually, because it's an open API platform, people have naturally, without any encouragement, have started building these things themselves. So little groups of farmers have organized themselves into building little alert systems. So they tell each other when the water is being opened in on the irrigation systems, when the fertilizer is arriving, when the trucks are arriving. So people are starting to do this on their own. And I think this year onwards we will try to facilitate that further, because currently the focus has been around building applications, the traditional VAR services. So I think a whole bunch of hackathons, workshops focusing on addressing market failures, market needs for these segments would produce some very interesting results. And and layering big data on top of this, definitely. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But at the moment, just getting the basic blocks in place, we'd be happy.
Fair enough. Elaine, maybe you can, Ericsson is absolutely a big ideas kind of place. So I'm sure you could give us lots of insights about what you guys are thinking beyond even just the NOC ideas.
I think you said such an important word. It's ecosystem, and I think the ecosystem is so fundamental to get all these services and big ideas to fly in the future. And two areas that we're working on in why, it's about scale, because today in Mobile for Development we have so many pilots all over the world, but we haven't figured out yet how to really scale the impact so that there are more people benefiting from them. And two things that we have focused on in order to get scale. One, you talked, both of you just made examples about applications and users. And one thing we're working on, we announced a couple of months ago a partnership with Facebook around internet.org is the name of the organization. And this morning we announced in our press conference the formation of an innovation lab together with Facebook. And that is really, it's kind of funny because it's taking a 2G network to Silicon Valley in a way and simulating a 2G experience to help Silicon Valley figure out how to get all these services when it comes to applications, devices, and the network. The interoperability and efficiency, how to get the economies of scale in introducing those services in new markets. So that's one initiative around ecosystem thinking and scale. The other one is M-commerce, mobile commerce, because really, how will people pay? Whether it's access to electricity, whether it's just normal mobile transactions, could be water in the future, could be, well, the sky's the limit, but how can small transactions take place? And this is something, there have been a lot of pilots or national programs around mobile commerce that we have seen just well in so many markets. But what we did when we went into the mobile commerce area and now really majorly launching a mobile commerce platform is to look at reuse of existing assets. First of all, I mean, we're carrying more than 2 billion subscribers in our normal charging systems if you look at prepaid and otherwise. So how to help the operators reuse existing assets, but then solve some of the challenges around interconnect. It doesn't matter if you can use an M-wallet service in one country, if you can't transfer across borders and into other countries and through different types of ecosystems again. So we really focused on mobile wallet services, but also the area of interconnect, because interconnect is really a barrier to scale. So I think those are just a few comments on ecosystem and scale where we are focusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, along those same lines, I think as we're slowly kind of trying to organize ourselves within GSMA to be more reflective of the changing around. And so, rather than, again, we've grown originally as a health team or an agriculture team or a women's empowerment team, largely because of the generous donors that we have and the way they're structured. And so when you have money flowing from a structured system, then you kind of reflect that system. And as we evolve, we're looking more around what are the key access barriers and how does that solve the larger problems? And looking at that, we're focused more along the lines of, how do we understand digital inclusion, financial inclusion, and then just general socioeconomic inclusion. And we really look at those, the points of access there are, access to affordable data. And that's a huge part of what you're talking about with the internet.org initiative, as well as access to some sort of ability to transact. Once you're on there, the ability to be part of a digital marketplace really requires that transaction ability, and also access to identity, which is, again, a hugely important emerging area in this, and that actually really, kind of circles around to all of the other kinds of, whether it's healthcare, basic services, employment, all of these different areas. Identity can be a hugely excluding factor if it's not done in a way where more people have access, or there's more flexible ways of applying that kind of identity. And that's, again, so Jacob, maybe what do you see on the future from your point of view, having done a lot of interesting things around both employment and a lot of these other ways of overcoming exclusion issues? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what's an interesting point from our experience is this tension between hyper-localization and big data. So everybody wants a service that, or typically I would as a customer, and I assume any mobile user would as well, and we see this with our mobile users, you want a service that speaks to you. So when you sign up for our job information service, this is tailored to your location, your skill sector, your educational background, your years of experience, and so forth. I mean, we found right away when we first launched our initial jobs platform in the Middle East, if you're a nurse, you don't want information about graphic design jobs. It's just not relevant to you. So you want this very personalized, customizable experience that speaks to you and your needs and what you want. And at the same time, from the implementer side or the mobile network side, we want big data. So we want to know in a huge proportion, what are millions of mobile subscribers looking for? What do they want? What do they need? What type of usage patterns exist? So of course, from the other end, from the implementer or operator side of our platform, we created all these analytics tools so you can monitor, how many people look for nursing jobs and how many people look for graphic design jobs and how many nurses look for graphic design jobs because they were bored of being nurses or whatever the case is. But I think there's an interesting tension there because you want to give this personalized user experience, but then at the same time, you're cognizant of the fact that this is something that is going on at scale. And really, to be successful, it has to go on at scale. We cannot offer just the customized service for a specific nurse in a specific location. So from our experience in terms of identity and exclusion and inclusion, how do you get that mix right? So how do you engage a user so that they feel, hey, this is special to me, this is content that is relevant to me, because otherwise there's not going to be uptake, right? They're not going to use the service if they don't find it meaningful. But at the same time, how do you replicate that individualized experience millions of times over? And it's a challenge. I think we work very actively to balance that tension, to ensure that users are getting content that is relevant, that includes them if they're in a rural environment in Rwanda, or if they're in an urban environment in Egypt, where we also offer the service. But then how do we go back to our mobile network partners, so Tigo and MTN in Rwanda, and say, look, here are metrics and here are analytics. We can tell you how many people are looking for jobs, what kind of jobs, what time of day, and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, a challenge for anyone who's in this space, how to juggle those two balls and do it successfully.
Yeah, I think challenges is an important thing to focus on again, and we can have a big idea for the future, but understanding what the barriers are between where we are today and where we want to be in the near future, especially as time seems to speed up and our ability to innovate seems to speed up. I think it's often, interestingly, it's not the lack of innovation or the technology that is the barrier. It's often the sort of human dynamics or the motivations for people to be involved in this space. I know that we've kind of identified some ongoing barriers. For instance, a solid business model around any of these services is often one of the things that we spend a lot of time trying to focus on and understand. As well as we've had some themes around non-traditional partnerships and groups coming together that speak very different languages. Do you want to touch on any of those or any other topics? What do you think are the barriers that we probably need to focus on first if we're going to start taking the steps in the right way?
One comment that we haven't talked about yet, but I think is going to be really increasingly fundamental going forward, is privacy. I think there's so many buzzwords now going around, big data for social good, and of course you can do amazing things. You can address everything from pandemics to real-time traffic management, whether you're in a modern urban city or a remote rural area. But I think, and maybe this is where the industry really needs to play a bigger role, having the scale in order to do that, in order to let all this innovation and social entrepreneurs innovate on top of the networks that are there. I think we need to take a bigger look actually on privacy and user data and look how to really fundamentally find ways to protect that and enable that type of online privacy in the same way as in the physical world in a way.
From our experience, I think one of the barriers is about bringing together stakeholders, and not to repeat, but to focus on a specific aspect of this, bringing together stakeholders who have sometimes not convergent interests, to perhaps put it politely. So we've got telecom operators in the room, and we've got implementers in the room. And again, another dichotomy, there's always this trade-off between value-added services, which are commercially driven, and then CSR, corporate social responsibility services, which are viewed as being exclusively socially beneficial and charitable in nature, and therefore having no commercial viability whatsoever. This is a real challenge in this space where we work, the mobile for development space, because Corina touched on it. How do you create a viable business model for a lot of the great things we're doing? Yeah, we can connect people with jobs, but okay, where does that go? Are we constantly relying on grants from funders, or is this actually going to drive itself through fees that users pay? So one of the barriers that we typically face when we launch a new service with any mobile network operator, and it always goes through the same series of steps, is how do we, first of all, determine whether you as the operator think, is this a value-added service or is this a CSR kind of thing? And then how do we ensure that we're not shunted off in one direction at the exclusion of the other? In terms of creating what's next, what I really hope happens is that there's more convergence between these two silos as they appear at the moment in the telcos. Because what we get is always, okay, go speak to the CSR team because it's under their kind of domain, or go speak to the value-added services team. And I think what we need to see is more convergence between those two. Because a lot of the services we spoke about this morning, whether it's sensors for remote monitoring of water systems, whether it's a marketplace with open APIs, whether it's disaster response, they've got a commercial and a social side to them. And to kind of create this, what I think is a false dichotomy and say it's one or the other, it's either going to generate lots of money because it's like a ringtone or mobile entertainment, or it's going to be this really important refugee service or typhoon recovery, but it's got no revenue model to it. I don't think that's going to be viable going forward. So I guess my appeal to everyone here is help us break those barriers down, and let's look at how we can create more of an alignment of interest between what the telecoms want, because I as an implementer want to fulfill what those needs are. But then also from the development side of things, how can we get these great services out to the community in a way that they need to be rolled out?
One of the things that I think is actually fantastic, especially Jack, about bringing the sensor here today and talking a little bit about it. I think one of the barriers from our point of view is also people need to see something before they can actually understand it, or the idea that you need to sort of demonstrate, prototype and be able to get those ideas. I mean, I found it fascinating that in your example of what the government of Rwanda was interested in doing with the sensor that wasn't already being done, still all in some way related to water, even though the sensor itself is not specifically only a tool to understand water problems. But because it's associated with water in its current form, it means that even if it's kind of a scaled up, expanded version of it, it's looking at all of these different water solutions. And therefore, the other examples you mentioned around, different, sort of latrines, wind, endless kinds of non-water related applications for it. And yet without seeing it, people kind of, don't necessarily have the same level of ideas. I think, and that same level, I think actually, Venura, I'd be really interested in hearing what are the, what are some of the ideas, to what extent are ideas coming to you from your subscriber base, from these different platforms that you have, where people are kind of, organically developing, as you said, their own, basically what would have been a value-added service in the end, and it's no longer being driven out by Dialog, it's actually being, self-created in your individual districts. And is there anything along those lines that changes the way you're doing business, rather than, sitting again within your offices and coming up with what do you think is the next value-added service that is going to get people excited for the next, quarter or a year? Is there a different way that you kind of focus how you operationally respond to those customers?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about supporting people to help themselves, essentially. I think the point you brought up about sustainable services, in this example where you get the actual stakeholders, the end customers, building services for themselves, they understand their pain points better than any of us. And if you create an environment where it's actually financially beneficial for them to create these services, we as an operator still maintain a margin delivering those services across our network. It's a win-win situation. And the mindset change from traditional VARs is you're no longer doing, your big VARs services focusing on your high revenue market segments, but you can go to your thousands of niche segments without having to, scale the team that develops these things. And at the same time, developing products that are easily adapted, it's very challenging. I mean, at the start, I mentioned that Dialog's got this big challenge of trying to move people from the base of the pyramid or their lifestyle up to the top of the pyramid. So we are trying to push the adoption of digital services up the pyramid. So building an m-commerce service that is used by middle base of the pyramid in Sri Lanka is very challenging. And even if you build services that optimize supply chains, you've got the people factor that we mentioned. The diffuse supply chains where there are people having margins right across. So this is behavior that needs to change. And that is something that is very, very difficult for us to drive. It is very challenging. And to be honest, my team, product team, we don't understand all of those aspects, those subtleties. And again, this co-creation model goes a long way towards helping that, because we start to get a lot of feedback on our services. We understand people's real requirements because they start to build it themselves, and we essentially support them to do it.
I just have a comment to be a little provocative, actually, on the earlier comment. I think it's the wrong distinction, actually, to put like value-added services against the CSR in different companies, because a lot of companies actually can start an incubation of an idea by having a internal source of funding. It's like this whole room. I mean, this is about public-private partnership, and if we don't have ways to finance innovation jointly, I think then we are really limiting. And I think the issue of humanitarian support, whether it's refugees or disaster relief, I don't think that should be commercial. Actually, that needs to be able to scale operationally. But I mean, that is about saving lives, helping people in a crisis. And I mean, at least we don't have any commercial intention at all in working with refugees. The only way to scale our service is awareness. It's about getting refugees to know about it, and that's why we're partnering with the operators so they can promote it, and that's what will bring the scale to it. But I think like things like mobile commerce and things like that, I mean, I head the corporate responsibility in Ericsson. I have zero philanthropy budget, and I don't ask for it. Everything we do, we're looking for sustainable business models, and that's what will scale over time. So I just really wanted to make that comment, actually.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, I think that's also a reflection of the evolution of understanding, what is possible with corporate social responsibility, I think, as well. And that's actually another perfect example from Dialog is the story of their sustainability team and looking at all of these different areas. And basically, they did such a good job as CSR as an incubator. They graduated themselves out of a CSR department. It's just the head of value-added services now, or that it's really business development, because realizing that for the particular population that that the majority of the people needed to see some sort of added benefit to their lives in order to be engaging with the company, and therefore it becomes hand in hand the same sort of focus on business development as well as serving the population.
Sure. So just to continue the conversation, I think Ericsson then is a key leader in the area if you've been able to ensure that the social responsibility aspect of your services does not have any demand for philanthropic grants and really has a business component to it. That's crucial. We work with anywhere between 10 to 15 different mobile networks in a year. It's completely bifurcated. When we walk in the front door, there are literally two divergent paths, and those teams don't talk to each other. So that's really more what I was referring to, and I think that wall has to get broken down. In terms of whether services for populations in need should be offered completely free or at cost, this is a real question that we've come across in the work that we've done. When it's a time of crisis, if it's a typhoon, if it's a hurricane, if it's Syrian refugees coming into Jordan, and we work in that domain as well, it's in our home region, absolutely. I mean, these are people who are literally coming with what they can carry with them, and by no means should they be charged for a service. They're at a time of acute crisis. We deliver at the same time services across the 3 Somali regions in East Africa, across South Sudan, in Iraq and in Gaza, in areas where the population is absolutely living on less than $1 a day. And we do that to support primarily donor-funded projects, whether that's UN or USAID or DFID or UK Aid or whatever the case is. Once your acute need has finished, what we found is you can remain a refugee. I mean, in the case of Palestine, we have refugees that have retained refugee status for 60 plus years. That's a unique example. But when you look at Dadaab as well, the largest refugee camp in the world in northeastern Kenya, refugees stop becoming short-term refugees and become long-term refugees. And at that time, it does raise a question as to what are the services that we can provide to the community, and also how should that be structured from a monetary standpoint. In Somalia, when we rolled out services at zero cost, the uptake was less than when we introduced, and again, we didn't introduce this as Souktel saying, hey, we want to get rich off of this. This was in consultation with the implementers, people like UNDP and like UNOCHA. If we start to charge a very small amount for this service, even if it's 2 cents per text message, for example, you're going to actually get a higher rate of usage because there's a value ascribed to using that service. If it's free, I can take it or leave it. If I have to pay for it, then I'm going to think very carefully about when and how I use it and what I do with that information. So I do think there are certain cases in which it is appropriate to charge a very nominal amount, but an amount nonetheless, because that then attaches a value to what you're doing and people understand that. But yes, if somebody is, when we've got heavy shelling going on in Gaza and we're working with the WFP to tell people where food's available, no, we're not going to expect them to pay for that service. But I think there's a distinction.
No, I agree with what you're saying totally on the differentiation.
Great.
So I think we are going to actually have some time for questions, and I think we possibly have some mics that we can bring around. So do signal if you want to ask a question. But I was just going to kind of wrap up on that point. What you highlight is a perfect example of where conversations across very different stakeholders can really benefit, because of course that lesson of ascribing value is something that in international development we learned through distributing bed nets, and the idea that bed nets were not being used in the right way nor used at all when they were given out free, and then it was a whole human behavior and how people ascribe value kind of transition around understanding if you're required to pay something for them, suddenly these things become very valuable and they become used and they're held on to, and so this is the kind of human behavior / customer behavior that is the kind of thing that when you get somebody in the room who's worked with these populations in the past before they ever actually had access to a network or a phone, being able to understand those dynamics could greatly change the whole proposition that's being offered. So so I know we have one here and one here, if we could get mics around.
Hello, my name is Sharbindu Banerjee. I'm from India. My question was about the hyperlocalization in big data, and which was very pertinent point was made. Everybody wants customized information, but the best person to customize the information is the user itself. If the user can exactly tell what information is needed, that's the highest level of customization. But mostly that doesn't happen. So does the operators have been able to find some way to motivate the users to share more and more this kind of information over the network they are using, so that not only it helps them to design service or products for them, but also gives a very valuable input to the big data analysis?
I mean, I can answer briefly. So yes, the short answer is yes. I mean, there are different incentives you can offer to users to share more of their information, but also to help create a richer user experience. So in the most benevolent model, we simply ask our users to say, help us improve the service for you. Share with us your thoughts on topic ABC, or we're doing mobile polls which ask you which components are you more likely to use. We do that in the Middle East region, and that seems to work well in the general sense, but the payoff or the result isn't immediate. I mean, you don't immediately see the service reflecting your needs. It's got to be taken into account, and then there's design or redesign that follows. We have some services which are adaptive to the user's habits and to their preferences. That's another thing. But in terms of the global reshaping of a service, we can ask in the general sense, how would you like to see the service change, or what are your inputs on the service? Another strategy, of course, is to offer mobile airtime incentives, and there are lots of organizations that do this and lots of mobile networks that do as well. So you can get, 5 euro cents of free airtime if you answer this question. That's tricky because you don't want to be incentivizing somebody to give a false positive or an answer that is not genuine simply to get the credit value. So you have to be careful as to how you structure those. But those are two ways in which we do it, at least.
Hi, this is working. I have a question that speaks a little bit to your earlier point about convergence and the kind of services that more people need becoming a core part of a mobile operator's service delivery. My question actually is, how do you see mobile services converging with the growing role of remittances and remittance economies, particularly in crisis, where more money is going to go into the Philippines from diaspora by far than from any international aid agency. And we've already got remittances outstripping ODA, overseas aid assistance, in every single country in Africa. We've now got cross-border financial transfers starting to happen, I think, in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania. I wonder, for those who represent mobile companies can speak to what that looks like and where that is in the business model, and those who are from more on the NGO side can speak to what they think, what they would like that to look like.
So I can answer as an operator. So for instance, in Sri Lanka, one of the highest foreign earners is external remittances from overseas foreign workers. So, and we've got Easy Cash, which is a mobile money system. And again, Easy Cash is also about digital inclusion, because while banking penetration is high in Sri Lanka, there's not many people who use current account type services. So for us, driving Easy Cash transactions is a big one, and remittance is an even bigger potential revenue earner, because there's so much money coming in. So it's something that we would definitely want to, both technical and regulatory aspects aside, it's something we would like to get done, yeah.
And also on the remittances, it's really the most efficient way to transfer money, especially for people that are transferring small amounts, because with a mobile remittance, I mean, we're estimating you can reduce about 70% of the transaction cost to people that have the least. People having the least are taking the biggest hit, you can say, on the charge. And so with mobile, you can make that so much more efficient, immediate, and direct to the person. And I think also the services you were talking about, whether it's Somalia, Sudan, or I don't know, wherever you are in the world, being able to charge for extremely small. I mean, I totally agree with your point. If you give something away for free, it's not valued. If you can give it for a small amount of fee, we've seen even in Dadaab models around solar lanterns, and how women have been able to create small businesses, charging very small amounts. And the way mobile payments, I mean, you can eliminate so many barriers, and I mean, you have the first-hand experience of that, but also making it more affordable for people that need the service the most.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is I think it really speaks to your earlier point about borderlessness of services now. I mean, especially when we're dealing with states or nations that are in transition. So Palestine, where we are based, is both based and is not recognized internationally as a state. And as a result, I mean, we de facto deal with not only the two Palestinian operators, but also all of the surrounding mobile networks, which people also capture. Really right about that, the photo, they uses in Djibouti. Somali regions is the same thing. So this idea that you can be in Djibouti and you can send mobile credit to your relative in Hargeisa, for example, is to us it just emphasizes the fact that we really cannot think anymore in terms of traditional nation states and mobile networks belonging to nation states. When people ask us to create services, they talk about the geographic specificity of those services, and we say, think beyond that. You can have this service reaching an entire region. It doesn't matter. We'll get hotlines hooked up in all of these countries. It would be amazing if we move forward and we can truly get interoperability across country telephone systems, but that's a much bigger chunk to bite off.
We have a mic.
Thank you. My name is Tariq, and I'm from Thuraya, the satellite operator. And as we hear today, the importance of satellite phones, and we are at Thuraya, we are very proud that we have successful partnership with mobile network operators in Asia and in the rest of the world. We are made actually to meet the disaster conditions, and we are there for you. So I know there's no time further to speak about the importance of the satellite phones, but me and my colleague are here in the room, and we would love to talk to any one of you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Patrick Gordon with UN OCHA. Just wanted to focus a bit on some of this discussion. It's really fascinating in terms of looking at this whole relationship between CSR and commercial endeavors and the whole development humanitarian sphere. Taking this argument, thank you. Taking this argument ad nauseum, if we were sitting here at the Food World Congress or at the Water and Sanitation World Congress, we wouldn't be discussing how much we would charge an affected community or a beneficiary, how much to use a toilet or how much to use of water or access to food. We've moved to the stage where communications is now a basic need and is on par with food, water, sanitation, and shelter. I think, and this is the question I'm going to throw at the panel, is when we start talking about innovation, we need to identify how do we interoperate? how do we create commercial models that interact with the CSR, look at the long-term sustainability. But I see very little difference from a humanitarian perspective between a 60-year-old refugee camp, which is still being donor funded and supported, versus an immediate onset of emergency. Let me leave it there, but I'd like to hear some comments. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I guess maybe a couple of brief points. I think there's a substantial difference between a long-term and a short-term refugee setting from our experience in that the needs of the community are different when you're there and you've just arrived in a location versus you have several generations of refugees in that environment. So simply from a mobile services standpoint, your needs will be different. It's less about getting immediate alerts about where you can find emergency food and medical aid, and it's really more about livelihoods, gender equality, and long-term empowerment. I think what is interesting, and perhaps the distinction you made in terms of, between food, water, and sanitation and mobile communication is, yes, I mean, I think because mobile messaging, for example, whether that's voice airtime or text messages or even data, is not a physical commodity that you can hold, I think there's definitely some circumspection about the value attached to that commodity. I mean, there was lots of press, even going back 2 or 3 years, about the fact that SMS transmission is essentially a pure profit generator for mobile networks. It's simply extra data which rides on base station communication that happens anyway, and therefore why are people being charged these exorbitant rates for SMS communications? I mean, at the same time, I would argue food distribution absolutely has a cost, and water and sanitation distribution absolutely has a cost as well, as does the repair. I mean, we saw in Philippines with the example that Smart showed us, the repair of base stations and the repair of the burying of fiber optic cables. I mean, all of those things have a cost, and someone has to pay for them. So I think maybe the bigger question is who is that person that pays? So is it the responsibility of donor governments to step in a time where a mobile network is compromised and say, actually, we will help contribute to that cost? That is a legitimate question, right? I mean, can this become a new form of ODA? And we don't know. The mobile networks are commercial entities, so it's a bit unusual to have a donor funding a purely commercial entity in repairing infrastructure, but it may be something that's useful. You can probably speak to that more.
I mean, we draw the line in the disaster response work, for example. I mean, restoring a commercial network together with an operator is a commercial thing, you could say. But what we do is we provide a free and temporary and non-commercial mobile network to humanitarian organizations, most of which are UN, or it could be Save the Children, World Food Program, Red Cross, whatever. So, and then our staff is seconded into those organizations in order to restore the communication between humanitarian organizations. That's so. The broader general public, I mean, this is, today needs to be restored on a commercial basis using the staff and all of the, resources that the operators and the telecom industry has in order to get it up and running again. So that's how we are running our program. And I think on the refugee issue, when I say we're offering it free, what we do is we set up the toll-free numbers or free SMS campaigns through the local operators so that refugees are aware of the service. And I agree there's a critical moment when someone becomes a refugee or is entering into a refugee situation. The 60-year thing, I can't really comment on that, but I can only say that mobile innovation should help to be able to create jobs and livelihoods, because in order to get out of a refugee camp, you need to have some type of livelihood or income in order to get out. And there I think mobile commerce and those types of solutions can play a role, or even access to education, or I mean so many ways where mobile can play a role. But again, it's using, in that case it would be using a commercial network. Someone has to have a phone, or there needs to be some type of access to internet provided.
Okay, I think we have one more.
Hi, my name is Aloysius from Ghana. I work for a startup called Farmerline. We use mobile voice services to serve small-scale farmers. My question is, we've used SMS and USSD to communicate to people at the bottom of the pyramid for some time now. Do you think that the voice services, outbound calls, and IVR has a role to play in your lines of work?
I mean, I'll just jump in, and before anybody, we actually just released a piece of analysis around the value of voice services. That was a bit of research we did just a bit earlier this year, specifically looking at this and that wanting to be sure that because of the popularity and excitement around SMS or USSD as pretty easy and generally low-cost ways to communicate, that actually voice can be forgotten, and especially in terms of literacy rates and in different languages and a whole lot of other barriers, that seeing voice services or seeing voice as a way to deliver services is still extremely important. And at the same time, the business model often outweighs. For an IVR service, while it might be a bit more expensive to set it up, that in the long term, what you're going to see is actually the revenues generated through voice services will be a better business model for you. So I think it's a great point, and it often gets overlooked, and it is one of the things that we've liked to highlight. So I am actually going to have to wrap up this session now. I think we have, I'm not sure if we have one last voting poll that people would like to have up on the screen before you guys take off. No? Okay. Doesn't matter. We've decided we didn't care what you thought of the session at all. No, I want to thank my panel coming today. I want to thank all of you who came into the room again first thing Monday morning. It's good to see the enthusiasm and excitement from so many people. So thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Congress.
Yeah.